Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Future of Space. I'm your host, Daniel Fox. Our guest today is Victor Vescovo. Victor is an American investor, retired naval officer, sub-orbital spaceflight voyager, and undersea explorer. He flew to space on board Blue Origin, New Shepard in 2022. In 2017, Victor became the 12th American to complete the Explorer's Grand Slam, which requires climbing the highest peak on all 7 of the world's continents, including Mount Everest, and skiing at least 100 kilometers to both the North and South Poles. In 2019, he made history's deepest solo submarine dive in the Pacific's Mariana Trench at Challenger's Deep, and was the first person to visit the 5 deeps, the deepest points in all 5 of the world's oceans. He's the first person to dive the 2nd and the 3rd deepest points on the ocean's floor and made the first solo dive to the RMS Titanic. He's been awarded 5 Guinness World Records for various diving and climbing achievements, and in 2019 was recognized by Guinness World Records as the person who has covered the greatest vertical distance without leaving Earth's surface. Victor, oh my, welcome to the future space.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
It's an honor. You like to do a lot, I have to say. You're not the person who sits still at home, I assume.
No, I was always the kid that always wanted to get out of the house and do things. I recall, I think the most dangerous thing my parents ever did was when I was about, I think probably 10 or 11 years old, I got my first bicycle. And so I used that to voyage all around my home city here of Dallas, going quite far afield to the point where sometimes I came home after dark to their great consternation. So I was, I think, genetically disposed to always being curious what's on the other side of that hill or what's at the next intersection.
Well, they think about the explorer's gene, being something unique. I think that your entire body is the embodiment of the explorer's gene. So congratulations.
Yeah, I think we had a conversation with one of our medical experts on the ship on one of our longer expeditions. And I think some people say there are like 7 or 10 copies of certain genes that create a propensity for risk taking. And he was pretty sure I had all of them.
Victor, before we get into all the amazing things that you've accomplished, could you share with us 3 words that for you captures the essence of space?
Yeah, I thought about this a lot, and I hate to sound glib, but the 3 words that come to mind are the final frontier, from one of my favorite shows of all time, Star Trek. But I don't mean to be glib because it really is the final frontier. There's nothing after space. In fact, if one was in space and one continued in a continuous straight arrow line, according to physics, it appears, for now at least, you'd come back to where you started, the curvature of space being what it is. There's nowhere else to go after space itself. So it truly is the last great exploration that could exist.
Did you ever think that we would get to where we are today, where we're about to make space a reality? I mean, we grew up, for a lot of people, we grew up with space being more of a science fiction, and even the incentives for the space race in the 1960s were more politics than really the capacity of it. Did you think that we would get there where we are? We're making it a reality.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I have a philosophy that if something doesn't violate the laws of physics, it's possible. It's a matter of discovery, engineering, and resources. And so humans, I think, have, unfortunately, because of our short lifespans, we don't really have a long view of what is possible in the future. But if you just look at how far we've come in 100 years, which is a blink of an eye geologically or cosmologically, I mean, we've come immensely far. And to think where we will be in another 100 years, one can scarcely imagine. So I think we're going to be able to do extraordinary things in space and on our own planet, and hopefully in the development of human beings to be even better in many ways.
Well, I mean, that's what these new frontiers always offer, right? The opportunity to do something better. That's what America was after Europe. When your kids are leaving, the family home, they always want to do better than their parents, or at least, the match what they have done, but do better. They will do their own mistakes, but they go out with the idea of creating their own lives, building on the values and the teachings that they've received. Um, Victor, obviously there's the science story of space, there's the technology, there's the politics of space, but what would be for you the human story of space?
The human story of space bears so much resemblance to many other extraordinary things we've done as human beings, like explore our own ocean using the old galleons of old and figuring out how to navigate latitude and longitude, which ironically could only really become effective when we invented clocks, which for a variety of reasons, which I think is a fascinating story in itself. But to answer your question, I think there are three words that really describe not just space exploration, but all of our explorations, which are: first, you dream about making it possible. Then you engineer it. And then you perfect it. So you dream, you engineer, and then you perfect. And in so many respects, I think that captures the essence of what we do as humans, which I think differentiates us from the animals of the earth, is that we have the capacity to dream, to think beyond our immediate existence. And then we have these incredible minds and hands that allow us to engineer. And then we have the ability to iterate and perfect so we can take the next step. And that absolutely happened in the space exploration phase of our existence.
It's going to be, I mean, the idea of like in 100 years from now, what we think is possible and not possible, I think it's going to be radically changed. I think we're at the turning point of an era of exploration, right? For me, I often say that life on this planet, when it went from single cell to multi-cells, evolution exploded, right? For billions of years on the single cell, there was just a little bit that happened, but when it went to multi-cell, literally everything exploded. We're about to go from single planet to multi-planet, and evolution is about to explode again one more time, because that leap that is needed will create something totally new.
Absolutely. It happened with the invention of the stirrup and harnessing horsepower, where that was the primary mode of transportation for most of modern human history. And then we invented the automobile, and then the aircraft, and then the spacecraft in rapid succession. So yeah, these catalytic inventions or use of tools that have been around us have revolutionary effects, and we don't know where they're going to go. But I do know that there will be a lot of change,
Do you?
hopefully for the better.
Oh, I do. I mean, I do believe it's going to be the better long term, right? I do believe though that there's going to be a lot of challenges, not just the legality, the politics of it, the science, the biology, but I think that ultimately these new frontiers always offer the opportunity for to do better. So, Victor, what do you think is some of the biggest breakthroughs that are needed for that next step? Is it energy wise? Is it biology wise? The technology, the engineering, on the material, or what do you think like it would be these big checkpoints that for you are necessary for that next big leap?
Maybe too broad of a term, but at the end of the day, it comes down to engineering. And right now, I think that the biggest minds and the best people are working on the key issue of allowing us to get into space and doing more things, which is the cost of accessing space. And fortunately, we have witnessed in our own lifetimes the cost of putting a pound into orbit go down from 6 figures to 5 figures. And hopefully soon, with the development of the SpaceX Starship, it could get down to double digits per pound. When that happens, you will have a massive ability to put large payloads into orbit and even pre-assemble them. And with that comes a lot of opportunities to overcome many of the limitations that we've had before, which is simply the size of objects we could put in space and the propellant to allow them to go long distances. So many things will be solved by just having lower cost transport in the exact same way that, containerizing shipping revolutionized trade, or having the first, deep water sail ships able to circumnavigate the globe. Those also opened up the whole world. So these things are different, but they seem to rhyme in history. And I think we're on the cusp of a revolutionary change in the access to space, which is so exciting to see.
Absolutely. What do you think is the role of AI in finding these solutions?
Well, I think AI, unfortunately, because it's so exotic and it has some initial success, it almost has this pixie dust quality to it where people just use the term AI thinking it will solve all problems or revolutionize things. It's a tool like any other. And it, in some respects, it can be kind of a dumb tool. All that AI does, and I was actually kind of involved 20 years ago programming some very early versions of AI using neural networks. They're actually not that bright in that they're just pattern recognition devices. You feed it a bunch of historical data, and it mechanically derives a pattern from it and then spits out a pattern based on new inputs. So it's not really intelligent. Now, it can mimic intelligence if it has enough patterns to go by. And I made that comment to some other people, and they said, oh, like a politician. No, I'm just kidding. But the issue is that, yes, there are certain situations where AI or machine learning or whatever you want to call it can actually help us solve certain problems potentially better. Engineering problems that may not be immediately obvious to a human being because we are trapped in our own minds. We only have so much experience. But an AI properly programmed with a proper data set could harness thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of examples and much quicker than a human distill that down into, oh, the valve needs to look like this. Those tactical kind of engineering solutions with AI, I think, would be a great partnership for humans in order to drive us even further technologically.
Yeah, the calling it artificial intelligence for me has always been a little bit of an issue because it's not, like you just said, it's not intelligence comparable to what we have. It's more the capacity to process something, a directive, super fast. One of the things, Victor, that I'm kind of curious on your end, some of the challenges, right, of transport, moving things, right? When we get to space, there can be several solutions with, we expect nuclear to play a big role in that. But when it comes to the engineering of lifting things from the planet, do you see a revolution of how that is done in terms of propellant, in terms of fuel, in terms of technology, or this is something that we're going to have to live with for as long as we know?
No, I think we'll make incremental progress, but I think the real revolution there will arrive when we can harness air-breathing vehicles to take us really, really high and then do that last kick into space using chemical rockets. That would make the entire projection of payloads into low Earth orbit much more efficient than it is now, where you're literally using brute force and chemical reaction rocket engines to go vertically into space. You're not harnessing the power of lift that you get with an aircraft. Now, of course, aircraft top out at a couple 100,000 feet, even with a lot of good engineering. You'll need that extra kick. But it's possible that even within the atmosphere, we could get hypersonic vehicles with such momentum that will just decrease the amount of the final kick you would need from a rocket booster or something of that kind. So I think there'll be incremental improvements, but the next big step, I think, will be using an air-breathing vehicle to go hypersonic that will make that last push into low Earth orbit a lot easier than to build a Saturn V-like vehicle to just go vertical all the way. That's brute force. It works, but it's not efficient.
It's definitely going to be interesting. It's always like if you look at the history of technology, these big breakthroughs have always kind of come by, accident. Yes, there's a direction, but then you find something along the way that kind of makes you reassess how to move forward. Or, you can think of even exploration is always the same. Like even from Europe, the ocean exploration where people were looking for a passage to India, and then North America was really the big ticket in the end. So kind of curious on that. Victor, you've been several times to the Titanic. I mean, you've dove in so many places and also been to space. Which one came first? Was it the depth or the sky?
Actually, if you consider the summit of Everest the sky, yeah, that was climbing Everest. And that, of course, was a very different experience, a very physical and brutal experience, unlike the other two. Going to the bottom of the ocean is much more technical, much more quiet, and really an engineering and mental challenge. And going to space, I was a passenger. I mean, I wasn't operating the spacecraft. I wasn't really doing anything other than trying to stay safe on the ascent and behaving myself in orbit and that kind of thing. And so that was more of just a wonderful experience. So they're all three very, very different, and yet all of them occurred within the biosphere of our amazing planet. And I just feel very privileged that I've been fortunate enough to do all three.
The so Everest was really brutal. How many years ago was it?
That was 14 years ago, and I climbed it in May of 2010. And it was on my second try. The first time I tried, I only got halfway up because I got frostbite on my hands, and I had to come down because I couldn't use the ropes adequately anymore. So it really is a brutal place. Anyone that ever says it's a walk up or, oh, you just have to pay a lot of money and you can make it up, let them try it. It is a massive assault on your physiology and a huge mental battle as well. It's a war zone up there when you get above Camp 4 in the death zone. And it's not an exaggeration to call it that, because if you stayed there, even if you sat resting, you would not survive. You were just dying more slowly when you're up that high. And so you've got to do your business and get out of there. It's a very rough place.
Do you have any? I mean, I'm pretty sure that you have your opinion on the what's happening on the mountain with the traffic. And recently there was a big accident. One person died because of the congestion at the summit. Do you mind sharing some of your thoughts on that?
Well, I believe people should do whatever they wish to do. It's true, however, that there are a lot of people on the mountain, and it really is kind of single file. And so that is a big danger, is that you can be stuck in a traffic jam with a climber ahead of you that's not doing as well, but there's nothing you can do. And once your oxygen runs out, you're in a very serious situation, because that really is what's keeping you warm. It's not allowing you to climb. It's just barely keeping your body alive. And I was fortunate on my summit day. We actually went up in a storm and we were kind of at the limit at what we could climb in. But the benefit of that was that most teams decided to sit that day out. So we had a clear shot to the summit, but it was brutal going, but we were able to do it. But yeah, it's a serious issue that there are so many people on the mountain, but I don't really know any way to solve that other than the Nepalese government, which has sovereignty to restrict the number of people that are allowed to climb. But it's one of the poorest countries on earth, and that's a major source of revenue for them. And their viewpoint seems to be, well, if people are adequately trained and they know the risks they're taking, well, they should be allowed to. It's not our country, it's not our mountain, and people have the right to do things. And so I really don't know if there's an easy answer there.
You just said something, and I was not aware of that. So the oxygen as you go up is not it. Its main purpose is to keep you warm.
Yeah, yeah. Most people, I mean, the physiology gets pretty exotic up there. So when you're above, Camp 4 and you're, at 25, 26,000 feet, your body is not designed to operate at that altitude. You are operating at 1/3 of the oxygen you have at sea level. At that point, your body is literally just trying to stay alive. We did our O2 saturation at Camp 4, and it was in the 70s. If you were at sea level and you had that, they'd put you in an emergency room. So really, when you go on oxygen, most of it is being used by your body just to try and maintain your core temperature, which its main function. That's what your subconscious is trying to do to keep you alive. It's keep you warm, keep you breathing, keep your nervous system functioning. Giving oxygen to your muscles to climb is kind of an afterthought. So to think that when you go on oxygen at Camp 4, all of a sudden you're strong and you can climb no problem like you're at sea level, that's not at all the case. You're still battling just to put one foot in front of the other. I was typically taking 3 to 4 breaths with every step I took on the last 1,000 feet going up to the summit. It was just a mental battle of wills against you in that mountain.
What was I mean, I always believe that for every expedition or everything that you do in life, there's always unexpected discoveries. And I'm kind of curious on, as you went down, even just the Titanic, but the Mariana Trench, but also so for the Everest, what was the unexpected beyond the misery and the hardness of it, the harshness of it? What was the unexpected discovery?
Well, they're all so different. I mean, at Everest, it was simply just the sheer magnitude of the physical assault on your body and your mind, just climbing day after day and, losing 20 or 25 pounds over 2 months of climbing that mountain. It's just a battle. And coming out the other side alive and hopefully successful, it is a solid feeling of accomplishment. I mean, there's nothing that ever compares to how hard that was. So whenever I reach a challenge in my life, I'm going, well, it's not as hard as climbing up Everest on summit day. So I guess I can keep sticking it out. You reach a depth of your capability that you didn't know you had. And that's one thing that I constantly tell people is that people are capable of so much more than they think they can. You just have to dig really deep for it, and which is uncomfortable, if not unpleasant. Now, like going down to the bottom of the ocean, that was extraordinary because I was in a vessel that I helped design and Triton Submarines built for me, but there's no way you could test it, the whole thing put together. There's no test chamber big enough. So the first time that it went down to 11,000 meters, I was in it. And we realized, of course, because you can't test it, that everything was theoretical. Now, we were pretty darn sure that it was safe and I would come back, but we did discover things like when you cold soak certain components at freezing temperatures in corrosive salt water at 16,000 pounds per square inch. Yeah, some of your predictions aren't quite accurate. Certain things break faster than you would ever imagine. Certain things just decide, no, we're not going to work. So that was a lot of discovery as well. But I am very proud of the team that we designed the core systems, the buoyancy, the life support system, the pressure chamber, that we studied ad infinitum to the point where we knew that that would not fail. Support systems, yeah, a lot of stuff didn't work, but we fixed it over time. But yeah, that was a lot of discovery. But that was the exciting part. The only really exciting part was I was in it, doing it. And then, of course, space, that was just, being in a rocket strapped to, a 10-story bomb effectively. And I have to confess, it did cross my mind as we were accelerating through Mach 1, going way past the altitude of Everest. I was thinking, well, hell, that only took about 10 seconds. That was a lot easier.
And when you looked out the window, did you have a plan of what you would do once? Because it's such a physical experience, right? The adrenaline, the
Yes.
rush, and if
Oh,
you're,
yeah.
yes. So were you conscious of what you wanted to do once up there?
Yeah. I do have to add what you said that, it is an amazing full body experience. One thing that I wasn't fully prepared for was just the vibration. I mean, you are strapped into a freaking rocket. And I think when you watch like a movie like First Man, they try and rock the camera so you get a sense of it. When you're actually strapped to a couch and there is a rocket engine below you, you feel that rumble. And it's like a dragon underneath you. And that was really visceral and something I didn't quite expect. And then, of course, you start going up faster and faster, and that Mach meter is crossing through Mach 1, Mach 2. Mach 3 vertically. I mean, the first time I ever went supersonic was strapped to a couch going vertical. It was crazy. But yes, you plan what you're going to do more or less. In fact, I would encourage anyone that's going to go into suborbital flight is to go on the aircraft that does the parabolic maneuvers where you can actually experience zero G for even 4 or 5 seconds at a shot, just so you get that initial shock out of your body and out of your mind. So when you go zero G, like on a Blue Origin rocket, it's not a complete utter shock and you're spending 10 or 15 minutes just getting acclimated. Because a lot of people try and swim. It's just a natural reflex, but that doesn't do anything. So, we took the obligatory pictures, we did this and that, but we were very fortunate on my rocket flight in that we had someone who had already been up on a Blue Origin flight. And he told us, he said, look, don't spend your time inside the capsule. And yes, you're going to get some photos, you're going to throw some things at each other, that's going to be fun, but just look outside those enormous, gorgeous windows and take in the view. Let it sear into your brain. And it was that way. I mean, I didn't want to leave the window looking at it floating in zero G. It was the overview effect hitting you with full force, which is the psychological phenomenon that you are a little bit changed when you've seen the Earth from orbit. It's a real thing. It affects different people to a different degree, but I definitely was affected by it.
I mean, that's the value of traveling and exploration and going to these new places is the perspective. I mean, Frank White coined the overview effect, but the, getting to the top of the mountain when you grow up in a little village and looking back and seeing the context, right? That's what it does. You see things in context, and you're able to uh, understand the complexity and the connectedness, the between these things that we most of the time we take for granted. So
Yeah, absolutely. And you look down at the earth and you see no borders. You see just the huge kaleidoscope of colors that make up our world. The blue of the ocean, the thin sheen of atmosphere, the brown, you know, expanse of West Texas where we launched from. And it's just gorgeous. And then, you can't but help think, wow, what a beautiful spaceship we live on. And look at what we do to each other and what we do to it. And you can't help, I think, of just saying, I need to do better, we need to do better. And that's why I'm a huge proponent for getting people into space. I know it's expensive, but hopefully it'll come down in cost as everything does over time, and get statesmen, politicians, artists, journalists, because I think only good things can come from people experiencing the overview effect.
yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, we're a species of flesh and blood. We need to experience things. We don't do well with concept. We do well when there's an incentive to change, when there's a physicality to something. And I've joked often with Jane Pointer from Space Perspective that the next summit, G7 summit, should be should be in the capsule, look up above, and when you look down, having these politicians seeing the Earth. And so, the Victor, I have a question because the Everest going down into the depth of the oceans and going up, each of them has a really unique sound experience, right? I remember when I jumped out of a plane for the first time, there are two things that I remember that I was not expecting. The first time I dove in the water, like scuba dive, I realized how loud it was. Like you could hear like a reef is like this constant chattering in the back. What that I did not expect at all. Jumping off of a plane, it's noisy. I mean, you don't expect it, but the first thing is like the rushing of the air. What was the sound going down into the depth? And obviously, I guess the the capsule, the rocket was super loud, but I'm pretty sure it was unique in its own way. And Everest. So these three different experiences are the sound experience for you.
It might surprise people, but the loudest was Everest, because that wind is whipping at 40, 50 miles an hour, where literally we were having to shout at each other and still could barely be heard. Going up in the rocket, of course, we had noise canceling earbuds, so we could hear each other. And it was loud, but not that loud, because they engineered the capsule so we could speak relatively normally to each other. But that was more of a visceral acoustic noise. You could just feel the rumble of the rocket until it, of course, separated. And when it separated, that was like getting kicked in the butt really hard. And then, of course, there was very little, there was nothing, because we weren't attached to an engine anymore. Going down to the bottom of the ocean was actually very, very quiet, because you're in a titanium sphere, and the only thing you really hear are the whirring of the air circulation fans. And you're in that descent for up to 4.5 hours going to the very bottom of the ocean. And it's just incredibly quiet and peaceful. Once in a while, the radio, not radio, but the communications with the surface will crackle and you'll answer that. And then it just goes back to being quiet. But that was a very interesting thing about being at the very bottom of the ocean. When you're dealing in that pressure, 16,000 psi, you cannot stay down there that long. You can stay months in space, even more than a year with proper provisioning. You can't do that at the bottom of the ocean. You can't bring enough supplies. That pressure will begin to just erode your systems over time. It doesn't want you there. So you are just a visitor. And when you're there, it feels completely ancient. It's dark. You can only see 30 or 40 meters, even with the most high intensity lights you have. And so it feels like you're walking through time tombs. You see these enormous walls of shattered rock where literally the tectonic plates of the Pacific and the Philippine plate are colliding. You can actually see right in front of you the V-shaped divot where the two largest tectonic plates in the world are colliding. and you know you're a visitor, and it's just a very overwhelming feeling, and you feel very, very small. In a way, the way you feel small when you're like on the summit of Everest, but at least there you feel like you're viscerally connected to it because of the stormy weather and the noise and everything. This is more subtle, and I don't know. They're just also very different experiences. Again, I feel so privileged.
So you don't hear, because I remember like listening or learning about submarines, how submarines is a structure actually that moves, right? It contracts and then expands, and you know you would hear the material. Uh,
Well, no, my submarine was made out of titanium. Mine didn't move that much.
so there's no, other than the fan, there's no sound. I mean,
Yeah, a little bit. Yeah, I'll say, I mean, you have to put it in context. When you go from sea level, let's put it this way. When you go from sea level to outer space, you're going from one atmosphere to zero, a vacuum. When you go to the bottom of the ocean, you're going from one atmosphere to 1100. It's just three orders of magnitude different. So in the first several thousand feet of a descent, yes, you hear the creaks and the groans and the shrinking of certain materials as it adjusts to the depth. But once you reach a certain point, it's pretty as compressed as it will get. These are insane pressures. And so after a while, the music so-called stops and it becomes very, very quiet. And what's also interesting, that I learned from my own scientists, was below 6,000 meters, I mean, we're talking like 20,000 feet. This is very, very deep. But below 6,000 feet, photons cannot penetrate that deep. So there is absolutely no light. In fact, it's really fun to put your head against the porthole and stare into the darkness. It is the blackest black that your mind could ever register. And it can induce vertigo. It was very interesting. And I'll never forget the quote by Nietzsche, who said, be careful of looking into the abyss too long because the abyss is looking back into you. I certainly felt that feeling at those times.
is it like it's like a black that pulls you in, that absorbed, not like it everything, or like, is
Yeah,
it like a visceral black to it?
yeah, in a way, it's kind of hard to describe, but it's the blackest black. It's like void. And so you almost didn't know how to deal with it or process it fully. I will say there's one cool thing though. On the way down, especially at between the 1,000 and 3,000 meter level, I learned a trick after a few dives where I would turn all the lights off in the sub, so it was completely black, and then I would flash all of the high-powered lights all at once for a second, and then turn them off again. And unbelievably, you would see the bioluminescent creatures in the ocean blink back at you. It was like lightning in the ocean cascading off in the distance. It was absolutely stunning. You didn't see it all the time, but I saw it a few times, and it was absolutely mesmerizing. And of course, the marine biologist told me, well, that's the most common form of communication on planet Earth, bioluminescent communication in the ocean. We just never think that way, being terrestrial animals.
And it's incredible to think that life exists in those conditions. I mean, like, so how far deep can you find, or did you witness life?
At the very bottom. That's what was so extraordinary, is that some people would say, at the bottom of the Mariana Trench, it's completely desolate. There's really no life there, et cetera. That's not at all true. I've been down there 15 times, Challenger deep. And every time I saw sea cucumbers, I saw polychaete worms, but most importantly, on the rocks, you could see colonies of bacteria that would be red, usually gold, and they were living, little cilia. You could see them, they were that big, and they were living off the methane and the minerals in the rock. And so this is a completely different form of life than you would have up here on the surface of the Earth. There's no chemosynthesis, and yet there was life. So if there's life on other planets, like on Europa or Ganymede, I'm pretty darn sure it's going to look a lot more like what we saw at the bottom of the Mariana Trench than what you see up here on the surface.
Yeah, I think that the universe is teeming with life, right? I think that there's life, and life can exist for hundreds of millions of years without being an intelligent, or to the, I guess, the human level. If you look at just what happened on the planet Earth, had it not been for the asteroid hitting the planet, the most likely the dinosaurs would still be around. They were around for hundreds of millions of years, and they would have been still around had it not been for that. And in a really short time, for a series of fortunate events and accidents and luck and all kinds of stuff. But the mammals have really risen, achieved more in such a short period of time compared to any other organism on the planet. And so I think we'll discover a lot of life out there, but intelligent life is going to be even more rarer.
I hope so. I'm hoping that these probes that they're sending to the moons of Saturn and Jupiter, I hope they do find actual living life, not just fossils like they're looking for on Mars, because I think that actually has major societal, even religious effects on how we perceive ourselves, perceive our place in the universe. Because if there is actual life in our own solar system, what do you think that does for the calculations on the so-called Drake equation of the likelihood of life in other solar systems and in the galaxy and the likelihood that it's intelligent? It changes things.
And it's going to change religion. You just mentioned a religion. Our concept of the divinity is going to have to adapt, or it's going to be challenged. And so it's going to be interesting to see what happens here, but also how it evolves as we, beyond the planet, right?
Absolutely. And then you have to just wonder what's the whole point of everything, right? Because religion helps us answer that question. But I think I'm obviously tainted by my incredible desire to explore and discover new things. So for me, that's, in my respect, that's my religion, is just trying to discover new things and push technology forward so that we can live better lives as humans. Because we live now, today, believe it or not, I don't think people properly appreciate it. We live in an extraordinary time. We don't die from disease like they did in the old days. There's actually less war or deaths from war than almost at any point in human history. We live better than any Roman emperor ever lived. We hold in our pockets the accessible total sum of human knowledge through being able to access, Wikipedia or the entire internet. It's extraordinary. And yet we gripe and complain about how life isn't that, great anymore. That's completely wrong. We need to appreciate our lives and continue to push us forward so we can become even more perfect and even more capable and hopefully result in less suffering as we have done.
Yeah, people always romanticize the past. They think that the past was much better. And I'm like, listen, you cannot go back with all the benefits that you have today. If you go back, then you go back and you take the package of what it was back then. But we've taken care of what we call the three big killers: famines, diseases, and wars. And today we deal with some of them to a small scale, but never to the scale of what they used to be.
Yeah, I love history. I love history. And when people say that, we live in a very horrible time, and all this, say, seriously, you really think that? Why don't you go and get a history book on the 30 Years' War in Germany? That was really, really bad. Like half the population of Germany died over 30 years of war. That's why it's called the 30 Years' War. That was really, and then the Black Death came in. Everything has some context to it.
And even what we're going through right now, in the US, people are saying, "Oh, this is the worst that the US have been through."
Oh my God.
I'm like, you have no idea. The US, the concept of the US is a history of these ups and downs.
Yeah, democracy is messy. You think this is the worst time in American history? Go back to the Civil War, for heaven's sake.
Or even the Vietnam War, or where like the presidents got assassinated, and their assassination. So like we have to bring context to these moments, because it's first of all, it's an insult to the past, right? When we say these big things.
People forget the United States, and I'm an American, even though I am a Texan first, but this country has enormous shock absorbers. We actually do have a very strong sense of country and Americanism. And I think the only reason why we fight so much is because we have that undercurrent of togetherness, and we know that we have all these institutions that at the end of the day, we all truly believe in. And that's why, yes, things can get loud, they can get messy, they can get pretty irate, but at the end of the day, we don't have coup d'etat. We don't have civil wars, like we did back in the 1800s, et cetera. And we'll get through this too. It's just one of our little internal squabbles that will resolve itself over time.
Yeah, exactly what I think. And I'm Canadian, but I've lived most of my life in the US, and I prefer living in the US. When people hear I'm Canadian and I prefer the US, they got a shock, a face, a shock. It's like, why? Well, it's because the US for me is an extremely dynamic ecosystem. It's where innovations and mistakes, you have the worst of everything, but then you have the best of everything. When it works, it's a moonshot, right? There's nowhere else in the world that can accomplish as here. When it doesn't, it's a shit show. And every 30, 40 years, it goes through this profound transformation where all the things that they fought for are being taken for granted and are being abused, and it reassess. And this is what we're going through right now. But the strength of the US have been to come out of these crises better. And I still believe that we'll come out better. So that's for me my vision of the future.
Yeah, I'm glad you and I thought of the exact same word to describe the American condition, which it's dynamic. But dynamism it's a double-edged sword. It creates extraordinary companies and people and music and culture, but it comes with a lot of loud and a lot of very strong differences of opinion. But thank God we have the ability to voice those different opinions without being thrown in jail for the most part. And I think that that's one of our great strengths, and something that, the other great thing that I see about American culture compared to so many others is that we fail a lot, and it's okay. When you fail in America, it's almost viewed as a badge of honor. In most other cultures, it's a sign of shame. And I think and everybody knows failure is the route to eventual success. If you embrace failure and you learn from it, it's going to make you better the next time around. And I think that's why we always get back up and contribute to the world. I mean, I'm very happy to be an American. I think we have a great amount to bring the world as we have, and I just hope we could do it a little bit better, as I'm sure everybody else does. We're doing our best.
That's the thing, is most of the people try to wake up in the morning trying to do the right thing. The issue, one of the issues that we have is I think that we lack in the skills to communicate and to navigate the complexity. So people find refuge in the extremes. But there's so much pointing fingers, and that's communication 101. That the minute that you start accusing another person, or whether it's your spouse, your partner, or um, the other person goes in defense mode. Even if they agree with you, they go in defense mode, and then it becomes back and forth and tick for tack. And that we have a lot of that.
Well, Americans have never been accused of being the most eloquent race. We can barely speak English. So I agree that that is one of our big things to work on.
Victor, I want to be mindful of your time, and I want to hear your three words of wisdom. But quickly, um, I'm sure that you have a lot on the table, projects that you're working on. Briefly, can you share with us some of the things that you have your fingers in?
Well, I actually prefer to do them first and talk about them after. I will mention one though, but I do that because that alleviates a lot of the pressure to perform. And when you're operating at the ragged edge of technology and doing very difficult things, you don't want to have the pressure to succeed, because if you do, you can take risks that you probably shouldn't take. You always want to have the ability to say, time out, let's stop, let's rework this problem, without the pressure of saying, well, you said you were going to do this and yada, yada, yada. I don't like that. I like to be more deliberate and have the freedom. But I will say one thing I am working on. One thing that I got fascinated by in the whole 5 Deeps expedition, diving into the oceans, was the fact that 75% of the seafloor is completely and utterly unmapped and unexplored. It's more than half of our planet Earth. And so I've become very passionate about, well, how can we do that? And it turns out that it's very expensive to map the seafloor. You need a big ship, you need a big sonar. So using what I learned in business, I'm trying to develop a ship that's actually quite small, but has one of the largest sonars ever produced on it. So it would be specifically built to map the seafloor. And I've been told that that's never really been done before. Usually it's an add-on to a larger ship, or this, that, or the other. But I'm hoping the next 3 years, this ship will be designed, built, and taken out, and we will be able to map hopefully even 1 million square kilometers per year with a single ship, which would just break the curve on the cost by more than an order of magnitude, and contribute to what I believe is the last great exploration on the planet, which is mapping the seafloor. Everything else has kind of been done, but not that. And so this would be a tool. And I love inventing tools, whether it's a submarine or aircraft stuff or a mapping vessel. That's how I get excitement out of life, is developing new things that hopefully push us forward as a species.
So just to understand, we cannot map the seafloor, all of it, simply by having these autonomous like mini submarine that we could control, basically spend their entire 24 hours. We can't do that.
Well, they need power. So how do they get power? And if they are trying to get like, glider type drones, they're too slow. And you need a big sonar. Never forget, as I've told people so many times, the ocean is really, 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 really big. Okay? I mean, it is most of the planet. It is 71% of planet Earth. Okay, that's, twice as big as all the land. So it takes a lot of effort to map it. You need wide area, powerful sonar with ships that are relatively fast. Drones are just too small, and they don't have the power to stay out there for months at a time. Yeah, that's been the problem.
I thought that actually the solution would have to, I don't know, like a mini nuclear drone that stays out there and has all the time in the world.
Oh yeah, countries would love nuclear drones cruising around their waters, mapping their seafloor. They would love that.
Yes. Okay, now I understand. Great. Yes. So it's more complicated than we can
Yeah.
think of. So that's what you can share with us, and then you have all the other projects that you will be sharing once they're completed. Victor, with such a background and a passion for life and for the unexplored and the curiosity, I mean, I know you've given 3 words, and I think they could be your 3 words of wisdom. But do you have 3 other words of wisdom that you would like to share? Victor's 3 words of wisdom.
My 3 words of wisdom, and of course they're coming from me, given what I've done, which is simply explore your world. It's that simple. But the major message I'm trying to convey, because I've seen this more and more, is that more people, unfortunately, are taking refuge inside. And I mean that in the broadest sense, inside their own heads, inside their own domiciles, inside virtual reality, inside TikTok or YouTube or what have you. But that's not real life. Real life is getting out in the forest, getting out in the ocean, interacting with real people on a personal basis. That's what humans do. And I think that's why there's been such an increase in the number of people with mental disorders, people feeling lonely, so much dislocation that was exacerbated by the pandemic. And now that we have the ability to get back out and interact with people and interact with our world, get out there. Don't feel sorry for yourself and become ensconced in these refuges that we built ourselves so that we can, put headphones on or virtual reality glasses and just exist in our own heads. I think that's a very negative path. And so I just implore people to break out of that and explore your world in all of its facets, places, people, experiences. You will be so thankful that you did.
You think that one of the reasons why people remain inside is because things have become a lot more complex to navigate, and they don't have the skills or the tools, or they haven't been taught, how to navigate the complexity, so they find refuge in that polarization?
Well, I believe in personal responsibility. And so I don't think it's anyone else's responsibility to train you to experience the real world. That certainly wasn't the case for most of human history. You had to get out there and experience it and deal with it. I think there's such a fear of failure, fear of so many different things. But welcome to life. Life is a series of interactions that are fearful that you're just going to have to deal with and get through. And yeah, I'm from Texas and we have a culture where we believe in extreme individuality, but I think that there's a lot of value in that. You can't shuffle off on other people the responsibility to be a responsible, unfearful adult. So get out there, make mistakes, be open to people and experiences, and don't become victims of your fear. As Franklin Delano Roosevelt said, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. And I think it's a very profound statement because it is true. People are afraid of being fearful, and you shouldn't.
I wrote this piece during during COVID where it was the difference between risks and fear. And risks are quantifiable, you can analyze, they're tangible, you can train, it's something that it's not up to, it's not an opinion. Risk, it's something concrete. Fear is the interpretation of those risks according to your upbringing, your definition of a comfort zone. And those are all over the map. And so,
I live in that world. I mean, my whole life, the last 5 decades, has been a series of learning how to do things in a fearful environment, but in a safe way. And it's all about risk management. So I'll be, climbing up the side of a mountain or diving to the bottom of the ocean, and one could easily become fearful, but you train yourself over your life to say, okay, that's something I can control, that's something I can't control. And fear is useful for heightening your senses, but it's actually not a productive emotion at all. It should only alert you, and then you go deal with the problem.
yeah, absolutely. Victor, I can't wait to see what else you have cooking on the stove. I'm pretty sure there's going to be a lot of surprises, and I can't wait. And maybe the next time we have that conversation is over a nice dinner and a bottle of wine, because for me that's the human experience. So
I agree. Hopefully it'll be in orbit.
yes, in orbit. It could be at the Explorers Club somewhere, but definitely. If it's not, I know that Antarctica is you can't do it on this one, or it's going to be the Galapagos, or maybe in the Arctic. But there's going to be a continuation to that conversation for sure.
I look forward to it. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Victor.
All right, you too. Bye.
Take care.